It's always like, I don't know how is it for other artists, but very often we hear this similar stories. I was in a high school in medicine for nurses, and that was like kind of a wish of my parents, because in the time of what Kosovo was going on in 90s, there was a lot of existential questions because of the war, and they always thought, first, if you do the high school, and it's something that is already in itself a bit of profession that could give you a job like nurse, but then you can do whatever. You can continue becoming a doctor with your studies, or you can go further. But they thought they would give me this entry. And I was very bad on it, so my grades were awful. But all my friends always directed me and said, if we see you somewhere one day, we see you in the visual art, being a painter or whatever. So even that I didn't dare at that time to say it loud by myself, it was friends who were kind of making it, obvious. And when time came to study, I told my parents that I'm going to study art and apply for Art Academy. They were really disappointed, and so in that case I had to kind of convince them that I'm serious about this. That's not a joke, and this is not just like out of like interest of being, doing something else against their will, but it's more like it's the only thing I know to do it better than other things. So I felt also vulnerable in front of them in a way, like, let me do what I think I'm good, and anything else you might direct me, I might fail. So that's how it started. And then going to academy, also my first encounter with going to museum or gallery or stuff, there was really at that time when I started studying art. So everything was just like beginning together. It's very tricky. I must say it changed a lot by timing, but I would say it's a little bit like you're never enough European. You're never enough exotic for Europeans, and still you are never European enough. So that's how I would put it. I think the turning points in my research happened mostly with my work between 2012 and 2014, where I was finishing in the process of finishing Schule in Frankfurt, the studies there, entering the PhD program of PhD in practice in Vienna, and also preparing my solo show for Munich Museum in Vienna. So this kind of years, I think, made quite a turn, and was mostly focused with the works I see a face, do you see a face, I miss you till I don't miss you anymore, and also the barriers, the untitled military barriers, what are used as a reference from United Nations in Kosovo. So basically this was a time or a moment when I tried also to make the crossroad between the politics of aesthetics and the common image, the abstraction between these two, and the dialogue between these two. And yeah, so I would say that made a turning point, that period. In 2007 I did illegal intervention in the National Gallery in Kosovo, where I basically responded to the discourse at that time, which was mostly circulating around the art scene between the art peers and different people, which really mattered. Their opinion matters to me at that time, where they basically stated that we in Kosovo don't have women artists internationally successful and known because they just basically don't have balls. So of course that tells a lot, because it shows already that as a statement means Kosovo scene at that time was quite strongly dominated by the male presence. and artists who were successful. So in this case, I thought and felt the urge to respond to that statement. And I thought the Muslim Ulici Art Prize, which was a big prize at that time in National Gallery, would be the right platform. So an opening ceremony of the prize, I buy a lot of bully balls, like from animal, and testicles, and then I decide to go inside while the speech is happening. So I enter in, leave the balls as a kind of a gift, and go out. So it was that kind of simple gesture, going in, leave the balls and go out. A lot of people also criticize it, why you didn't do it this way or that way after it was done. But for me it was very important, and this gesture is very simple. And it's not violent, and it's not like anything, but just a subtle gesture of responding towards. Of course, this work wouldn't make sense today much or meaning if I wouldn't pursue my career to this degree where I am today and what I do. So it wouldn't stay only. And that was haunting me, because I never wanted this to be just one hit wonder, making a statement but not being able to prove that also that statement stands for itself. So yeah, that made the first shift at that time in the conversation of gender issues and representation, and also it was considered to be the first illegal intervention in a white cube, meaning institution level, in the history of art in Kosovo. It was interesting. The feedback was all kind. In this kind of case, it was the time when internet was really not yet as established as today. You can imagine it's 12, 13 years ago. And so there were like these online forums, and somebody dropped this as a kind of information that happened. And there were like all people from all around the world debating about if it's a good or bad artwork or good gesture or intervention, or what does it mean, and blah blah. And so somebody told me it's happening online, and so I went on the internet and I found it, and I was like, oh my god, that's shocking. How do I handle this kind of criticisms? And then it was a lot about also media reacted, like national and local, and like from TV to journalism. And many of them also are art critics. They told me, also you really provoked with this, you like to provoke. And I was like, no, I never thought to provoke. I was the one who was provoked. So it was not the intention to provoke you. It was, for me, important that I respond towards those provocations that were already there. And so if my response already provokes you after, then it's something else. That's another story. You can respond back to me. But I didn't have that intention to provoke you. The provocation was on the ground level already. So yeah, that maybe shortly to explain how interesting was this shift between the word luminous gardens. I have always seen that as a kind of not really starting point, maybe as a next level of continuation of my work, or trying to respond to the identity construction that was very present in the time of Kosovo after the war, and how this period of nation building state changed social and political and cultural behaving, towards like this aiming a Western democratization and so on. So Luminous Garden was one of the elements which I thought visually was so present, because it was really shifting a different aesthetics between the private properties and all this turbo architecture happening after the war in Kosovo. And I was specifically looking at the fences, which were from 50s, 70s, and more trying to pay attention and highlight and maybe pay a certain kind of homage, because they were less and less present and disappearing, and being replaced by a new, more neoclassical kind of style of polishness, of fences, which everybody, as a question for me, was like, why so high right now from these low, friendly fences, which were allowing that social interaction between the neighbors to neighbors were being much more, naturally kind of developed, while now everybody is just putting really high fences and kitschy in a way, and trying to impress who, protecting from what, protecting whom. And so all these questions were very interesting, how that shifted, And in my work, when you see that fence from this 50s, 60s, 70s aesthetic in the background of shading of color, it's almost like also, as you said, isolating, but at the same time creating a certain kind of horizon that it opened it up at the same time. If the clouds are a way to escape the border, I'm not sure. Maybe the clouds for me, it's more like to dilute the borders. Right now, when I think of the clouds and I look at them on the daily basis, I always think of my sculpture, which I recently just installed in Munich outdoor. And since the view of that sculpture depends a lot on the clouds' relationship, the way that sculpture creates certain relation and temporality with the clouds and the nature in the background, it affects visually a lot. So therefore, every time now, every day, when I look at the clouds and if they are there, I'm thinking how my sculpture is going to look right now. So that's created completely a different. I have been always fascinated by clouds and I've done many artworks in relation to it. But now, in daily basis, I'm always thinking of my sculpture in that moment. Do I believe on the blue? I would say I use blue for different reasons, because first of all, I think blue allows you to speculate a lot, and blue also as a color have been gone through different meanings and metaphors through the progressive history. So therefore you can have a lot of different references to it, the way one could bring that into a conversation. And in my work, the blue started more as a content, and later, at a certain point, it developed into also the way of, as a gesture, of claiming certain kind of media language, and especially thinking about claiming as a more Western gesture. What does it mean? Does it happen more from that history speaking? More often from Western artists and male artists, The blue, I would say, it's one of the colors that by nature is resistant to different definitions and limitations. So it goes well with all other claims or other kind of aesthetics, what are important in my work, where I want to produce opacity or detour or fluidity or liquidity or all this kind of deterritorialization or deconstruction of certain kind of aesthetics. Blue can kind of create certain crossroad between many of those boundaries, I would say. Its urgency got lost in reverse while being in constant delay. It's a work that I started on series in 2017, and it's mostly connected to the question of, can contemporary spatial information of what is present change the perception of discarded object? So when I encountered this discarded object in Kosovo, in a military, not in a military camp, but in a certain kind of market, like secondary market, which was selling the leftovers of military camp from NATO, and how that object, what is haunting actually those objects. So it made me think immediately for Avery Gordon hauntology, perspective of where she says everything is haunted by the specter of something. And then in this case I thought, what are these objects haunted? The moment I find out where they're coming from, And so knowing a little bit the history of Kosovo, that still doesn't have its own military, although it's independent since 2008, what does it mean, the role of NATO at this point? NATO entered in Kosovo after the bombing in 1999 with the troops, with 50,000 troops. So you can imagine how many military camps they needed to host those troops. But today there are around 5,000 troops present still. So it reduced a lot. So it means a lot of military camps were also closed. So in this case, there's a lot of garbage from those camps at the same time. And so questioning all this kind of status quo and politics between the past and present and what does it mean the future of in this regards, I decided to make 4 robots. So far they exist only 3, and then basically go backward with the time frame they represent. So the first robot that I made is the last robot on the movement. So they go backward. Its urgency got lost in reverse while being in constant delay. And then it's the second and the third, but they're all in a position, each gets more passive. So one is sitting while the other is laying down on the stomach and the other laying down on the back. So the fourth one, which is about to be produced maybe next year, it's going to be even more passive than those. So it's like kind of creating time frame by frame and sequence by sequence, by going backward. And there's a lot of performativity of time on the title, because the title says its urgency got lost in reverse while being in constant delay, which you think, okay, the urgency got lost, reverse, there are so many delay, so many words which perform time in one way or another. And how do you freeze this moment, Is it you, Joe? It's one of my works which I would say maybe the most problematic one, because there are many people who just try more and more to understand. If I bring Joe into a lecture, I have to give, but the whole questions always end up from the audience mostly about Joe, which is interesting because in the time I did Joe, I didn't take it that serious. It started the series 2015. So basically the way Joe enters in my work, it's more as a detour, and so detour in this case is ambiguous. It fools tricks, it eludes the different obstacles or maneuvers obstacles in rather than confronting it directly. It fools a lot of tricks and tries to camouflage between different personas as a character. So what is also interesting for me about the detour is that the detour in this case of specifically about Joe, that you can never really count or make a definition of what counts as a failure or a success. So that's also what is interesting about Joe, because I never know if Joe is really succeeding or failing with his attempts, So Joe is a kind of alter ego and as a counterposition in my artistic production. And it starts with the time when I got a lot of invitation, although the invitations started to grow in 2015 after I represented Kosovo Pavilion in Venice Biennale. So all those invitations made me feel a bit like, oh my God, I can't handle this dynamic. This is like too fast now. Everybody wants a new artwork, a new show, new this, new that, you know. You have to come up with a lot of improvising, time, production things. So, and that's where I brought Joe in, because I thought Joe could be my joker. Joe is this white male character who is going to do things I don't want to compromise, so I don't want to do it. So Joe is going to do things I feel uncomfortable by myself as Flaka, you know. And so I always see Joe as more like kind of my extended arm or third leg or third eye or reserved kidney or something that Joe can mobilize constantly and be smarter and faster than me and do things what the kind of smooth operator or he could also be super clumsy and still be excused, you know. So Joe is also a she that likes to be represented as a he because it's just easier, you know. So there are many things what Joe can just do it, what I can't do it. And also there's a thing about Joe, one doesn't understand if he's really stupid or just very, very good on acting stupid. I also don't know. No. Joe, there's only a relation between me and Joe that sometimes blurs when we don't know who's working for whom. When we don't know who made who. Is Joe making me or I'm making Joe or shaping, you know, each other? Or am I working for him or he's working for me? At this moment, I'm mostly working on wrapping up my PhD in practice because I would like to finish the dissertation upcoming year. And I'm also working on an opera project for Festspiele Bregenz and Kunsthaus Bregenz. It's a collaboration where I'm doing the stage design. And then I'm also working for 2 billboards for Munich city and commission, and finishing my other sculpture, which is about like last details for outdoor, another sculpture outdoor for another festival I know in Brussels, and some other shows and so on.